The film begins aboard a spacecraft drifting far from Earth. Ryland Grace suddenly wakes from a coma with no memory of who he is or how he got there. Weak and disoriented, he struggles to stand while trying to understand his surroundings. He soon discovers that the only other crew members on board, Captain Yao Li-jae and engineer Olesya Ilyuhina, are dead. Looking through the ship's windows, Grace realizes he is deep in space within a distant star system. After examining the ship's data, he estimates that returning to Earth would take roughly 13 years. As time passes, fragments of Grace's memory slowly return. Before the mission, he worked as a middle school science teacher. During one class, he explained the existence of the Petrova Line, an unusual infrared trail stretching from the Sun to Venus. The line is created by organisms known as astrophage, which are draining energy from the Sun and causing it to dim. Grace reassures his students that scientists around the world are trying to solve the crisis before Earth experiences catastrophic cooling. Grace later recalls meeting Eva Stratt, a powerful government official overseeing the global response to the disaster. Because of his research into the Petrova Line, Stratt recruits Grace to study samples of astrophage collected during earlier missions. After several failed experiments, Grace discovers that astrophage is actually a living cell-like organism. Although the samples die after prolonged exposure, he determines that the organisms are composed almost entirely of water. Further investigation reveals that they reproduce around Venus by consuming carbon dioxide and drawing energy directly from the sun. The discovery turns astrophage into a revolutionary fuel source. Stratt introduces Grace to an international council of scientists and reveals the existence of Project Hail Mary. Scientists have learned that astrophage is affecting stars across the galaxy except for one star system, Tau Ceti. The mission is designed as a one-way journey to Tau Ceti in hopes of discovering why that system remains untouched and finding a way to stop the extinction-level threat facing Earth. Back in the present, Grace honors Yao and Ilyuhina before ejecting their bodies into space. While approaching Tau Ceti, he witnesses the Petrova Line up close for the first time. Moments later, he is shocked to discover an enormous alien spacecraft nearby. The vessel sends a strange container toward the Hail Mary. After confirming it poses no threat, Grace brings it aboard and finds a model representing the Tau Ceti system, along with indications that the craft originated from the star 40 Eridani. The alien ship later creates a tunnel made from a substance called xenonite, allowing Grace to cross between the vessels in a spacesuit. Inside, he encounters a rock-like alien creature that mirrors his gestures and communicates through sound. The alien has even constructed a tiny model of Grace with his arm raised in victory after catching the earlier container. Grace names the creature Rocky. Since Rocky's species relies on echolocation rather than vision, Grace builds a voice modulator that translates Rocky's speech into English. Through their conversations, Grace learns that Rocky belonged to a crew of 23 Iridians and is now the only survivor of his mission. Realizing they share the same goal, the two form an alliance to save their worlds. Flashbacks reveal more of the preparations for Project Hail Mary. Stratt introduces Grace to Yao, Ilyuhina, and lead scientist Dr. Martin Dubois, along with backup crew members prepared to replace them if necessary. Everyone involved understands that the mission is likely suicidal, and they discuss the methods available for ending their lives if things go wrong. The team also witnesses the devastating power of the astrophage-powered 1099 spin drives when one demonstration melts an entire ton of metal. Grace privately admits to Yao that he does not believe he possesses the courage needed for the mission, but Yao tells him that bravery often comes from finding someone worth being brave for. In the present timeline, Rocky visits the Hail Mary using a small protective suit adapted for Grace's atmosphere. Grace documents their growing friendship and jokingly refers to Rocky as his new roommate. Together, they begin investigating why Tau Ceti remains unaffected by astrophage. Grace also introduces Rocky to parts of Earth culture, and the two become increasingly close. Grace eventually admits that he had no real relationships waiting for him back on Earth, while Rocky speaks fondly of the mate he left behind on Erid. Additional flashbacks show how isolated Grace felt among the rest of the crew, all of whom had loved ones. During one memorable moment, Strat unexpectedly joins the crew for karaoke and performs Sign of the Times, surprising everyone. Grace and Rocky eventually travel close enough to Tau Ceti to enter the Petrova line surrounding one of the planets. They land near Tau Ceti E, which they nickname Adrian to continue the Rocky theme. There, Grace discovers an organism capable of consuming astrophage. He names the bacteria-like life form Taumoeba and realizes it originates from life living on Adrian. When Grace sadly accepts that he may never return home, Rocky offers to give him enough astrophage fuel to make the journey back to Earth, even though doing so would greatly delay Rocky's own return. The gesture deeply moves Grace, who introduces Rocky to the concept of a hug. Another flashback reveals a major disaster during the mission's preparation phase. While Grace and Strat inspect the completed spacecraft, an explosion caused by mishandled astrophage kills Du Bois and several backup scientists. Desperate to keep the mission alive, Strat pressures Grace to replace the dead crew members, but he doubts his own abilities and asks for time to decide. Back in space, Grace and Rocky descend into Adrian's atmosphere to collect more Taumoeba samples. During the operation, a fuel leak causes severe damage to the Hail Mary. While trying to stabilize the ship, Grace is thrown violently into the controls and loses consciousness. Rocky leaves the safety of his own environment to rescue him, exposing himself to dangerous conditions that badly injure his body. Grace later wakes to find Rocky severely weakened. He quickly creates a controlled environment that allows Rocky to recover while he continues breeding Taumoeba to combat astrophage. Once Rocky regains his strength, the two celebrate their success together. Eventually, however, the time comes for them to separate and return to their respective planets. Neither wants to say goodbye, but they acknowledge the bond they have formed before heading off in different directions. One final flashback explains how Grace ended up aboard the Hail Mary. After careful consideration, he ultimately decided he was too afraid to join the mission, despite knowing what was at stake for Earth. With no other qualified option remaining, Strat has Grace drugged and placed aboard the spacecraft against his will, which explains why he awoke with no memory of the mission. As Grace travels back toward Earth, disaster strikes again when the Taumoeba begin eating through the xenonite storage containers and consuming the astrophage fuel aboard the Hail Mary. Although Grace manages to contain the immediate threat, he realizes that the same thing will eventually destroy Rocky's ship, which is made entirely of xenonite. If the Taumoeba does not kill Rocky first, radiation exposure eventually will. Faced with a final choice, Grace realizes he only has enough fuel to either save himself or rescue Rocky. He chooses his friend. Grace launches probes carrying Taumoeba back toward Earth before turning the Hail Mary around to reunite with Rocky. The probes eventually arrive safely on Earth, where Strat reviews the logs Grace recorded throughout the mission. Grace and Rocky successfully return to Arid, where the Iridians build a biodome that allows Grace to survive on their planet. There, he resumes his old profession and becomes a teacher to Iridian children. Rocky later informs Grace that their scientists have developed technology capable of sending him back to Earth. But after everything he has experienced, Grace chooses to take time before deciding whether he truly wants to return home.